Hi everyone, Heather here with PersephoneReturns.com, and today I'm here to talk to you about Uranus in Taurus. And so Uranus is about to move into Taurus finally. I've been speaking about this transit probably since I think October of last year is when I first started doing videos on this. I did an interview with Lotta on Astro Lotta's YouTube channel where we talked really in depth about the coming global changes and also some of the personal changes that are going to be occurring with Uranus moving into the sign of Taurus. And so Uranus, when it moves into any sign, indicates where we're going to be experiencing the most disruption and the most frustration and also the most change, the most innovation, and all of the exciting new developments on a global and on a personal level will be occurring where Uranus is happening in your chart. Uranus is the innovator. It's the revolutionary. It brings things that are sort of outside of the box that we never would have expected or thought of before. It brings downloads, insights, and it brings liberation through changes that create greater freedom for each of us, right? And so Uranus and Taurus is going to be a really exciting time because Taurus represents everything that is very static and stable. Taurus is a fixed earth sign, right? So fixed earth indicates, so fixed signs are very stable. They have a hard time changing and letting go. These signs are associated with the middle point of each season where things are sort of stable, they're static, we're not changing, we're not in between seasons. It's just, spring, right? When we're in the middle of Taurus season, which is where we're at right now. We are at the height of springtime, right? And then, when we have an earth sign, the earth signs are the most grounded, the most stable, the most practical, the most physical and material oriented. And so we have this very physical, very practical, very grounded energy that's going to be shaken up by this very electric, sort of shocking energy of Uranus. And so on an individual level, this is going to bring instability in the areas that we felt were most stable in our lives. And that's usually going to be for the better. In my personal experience with Uranus and with working with, hundreds of clients, if not, a few thousand all over the world, what I have found is that when a Uranus transit hits, it usually does bring some sort of disruption. When it's a hard transit, like a square, it can bring some chaos, some upheaval, and it might not feel very good in the moment. But after the fact, when you look back on it, you realize that change that happened was very necessary and that you're much more liberated, you're much more free. You feel more in control and more in charge of your own life as a result of going through that transit. It makes you change something that you wouldn't have otherwise changed. And on a global scale, it does the same thing. So it makes what is already apparent in terms of like the problems in our society, it makes them feel completely just like you can't do it anymore. You can't continue on in the same way. It's just it's like you've been doing the same thing for day in and day out. It's not working. And Uranus, when it comes in, it brings this energy where it's like this frustration and this intense sort of energy where you feel like you finally have to break free. You can no longer stand the status quo because the status quo isn't working for us anymore, right? And so on a global scale, that's the energy that it brings. And so for Uranus moving into Taurus, Taurus represents things like food, right? Taurus rules our food. It rules our relationship with our bodies. It has an association with health and with the body and with body movement. Taurus most notably has an association with the material possessions, the material realm, and our finances, right? And so finances and money are associated with Taurus. Taurus is also associated with natural resources because it is associated most closely with Mother Earth. Taurus essentially rules the earth in terms of the land that we, build our homes on, grow our food on, where we live, right? It provides nurturing. It provides what we need, the sustenance, the foundation that we need in order to grow, to keep ourselves healthy and to expand on other levels, right? Because we need that foundation of our food source, our home, our land, our connection with Mother Earth, the herbs, the medicine that Mother Earth gives us. And so Taurus has a really strong association with that nurturing, motherly, earthy energy as well. And so, Taurus rules the earth. So, and also like our weather and earth changes, things like that. But in terms of natural resources that we extract from the earth. That is also something that is ruled by Taurus. And I spoke about this, or Robert Phoenix spoke about this a little bit in the interview that I did just, I think, 3 weeks ago on my channel. So if you want to go back and listen to that, you're going to get a lot of insights from Robert, who is one of my teachers, who's really brilliant at mundane astrology and making, global world predictions. And so his viewpoints are always just a little bit different than mine, but, we're usually quite spot on. So I brought him on to get like a little bit of a different sort of perspective on what's going to be coming up for us. But anyway, so, natural resources, especially silver and gold apparently as well, even though gold traditionally should be more associated with Leo, and Taurus and Leo are sort of in square with one another, which we'll get into when we talk about the generational influences of Uranus and Taurus. There is an association with gold, and I'll show you this in the patterns that come. And I think it is probably having to do with, the square to Leo, but, we'll get into that too. But the patterns that come each time Uranus moves into Taurus always have an association with gold and silver, especially gold more recently, and especially in the United States. And, silver is associated with Taurus as well. The moon has an association with silver, and the moon is exalted in the sign of Taurus, and Taurus rules natural resources that we extract from the earth, right? And so, these are all the different things. I mean, there's more beyond that, right? It's our physical, it's our connection to the physical, to the sensual, to the tactile. When we're talking about Taurus, we're talking about things that have strength and material value that is long lasting. And so it's the most physical, the most tangible, and the most sensual of all the signs. When I say sensual, I don't just mean like in the bedroom. I mean like sensual in terms of enjoying the sensory experience, enjoying taste, touch, smell, these types of sort of more primal sensations in terms of our sensory experience, right? Even, vision and seeing and things like that. The five senses are all associated with the sign of Taurus, but especially more like taste and touch and smell and things like that, because it's more like rooted in the earth, right? It's like this earthy sort of energy. And so these are the types of things that are under the rulership of Taurus. And so what can we expect when we have Uranus moving into Taurus? Well, obviously, we can expect changes and innovations in all of these areas, right, that I just mentioned. There's going to be a lot of disruption when it comes to our finances, our healthcare system, Mother Earth. We can expect earth changes. That happens usually when Uranus moves into Taurus or around that time, historically. We can expect changes in the weather. We can expect changes in the way that we grow our food and our relationship with Mother Earth and the planet. And we can expect changes in terms of, what did I already mention? I mentioned a lot of this already, but changes in terms of our food, our nutrition, our relationship with our bodies, alternative medicine, and especially in finance. And so in order to get a really clear picture of what is going to happen this time around, we have to kind of backtrack, right? We have to go back in time and revisit what happened the last time Uranus was in Taurus, the last couple times even, all the way back, as far as we can. But I'm going to focus primarily on what was going on the last couple of times, especially this last cycle of Uranus and Taurus. Because when we're talking about astrology, we're talking about the study of cycles and rhythms and patterns, right? When these transits come about, they come in cycles. And so each time the cycle comes back around, it brings about a similar energy, but it brings it about in a new and exciting way, right? So there's a different context to it, and there are other planetary energies at play, but you're going to have a revisiting of a very similar energy that comes around time and time again. And so it's really important to go back when we're looking at sort of the global grand scheme of things, or even when we're looking at transits in our own lives. It's important to look at these cycles and to look at what happened last time. How did that come about? What themes or energies were present when this transit came exact? And so, we go back to the last couple of times. First we had, let's see. So I'm going to talk about what happened 2 cycles ago real quick, just to kind of lead into what happened in this last cycle, because the time before last was between 1850 and 1858. This was just after the potato famine ended in Ireland. And in the United States, this entire period encompassed the peak of the California gold rush, right? So California is going to be key in this sort of energy because California comes into play the second time around, and I think it'll come into play again this third time around. And so we had the California gold rush that actually began the year before Uranus officially moved into Taurus. So what we see in these patterns is that there's an energy already present usually, like when the transit starts, so you can kind of see what's about to happen, and then it just explodes and becomes very mainstream during the actual transit of Uranus and Taurus. And so we had the peak of the gold rush. The gold rush began in 1849, and in 1850 we had Uranus fully into Taurus, and from 1850 to 1858 we had in the United States everyone just rushing over to California, you know, claiming their land, trying to get some gold to strike their riches, right? So there's a theme of money, there's a theme of gold, natural resources, and also a changing of borders, which is something that I think is going to occur this time around, and that, you know, Robert Phoenix and I talked about in our video as well, you know, kind of briefly, but I think that that's something that could come around this time around as well. And during this time period, California became a state. So California was born. Its birth chart has Uranus and Taurus. And so this is probably why California in the United States becomes sort of a prevalent player with a lot of changes that occur every time Uranus comes into this cycle. Well, at least we know this from the last cycle. It's only been one full pass, and this is the second Uranus return for the state of California. And so those are some of the things that were happening during this past that happened 2 cycles ago. In the last cycle of Uranus moving through Taurus, we had a lot of major upheaval and change when it came to the financial system, our food sources, financial regulation and laws that were passed, and different things that happened in that realm, different, you know, things involving international trade. So we came into this cycle in 1934, just, you know, sort of at the peak of the Great Depression. And so the Great Depression began after the stock market crash of 1929. And then in the 1930s, we were in the Great Depression. And so this was a time when we were making major changes on a global scale to the financial system. And around the time Uranus was shifting from Aries into Taurus, pretty much all of the major westernized countries left the gold-backed standard for currency. And so we all adopted a fiat currency system. And so, you know, we have now these central banks, this fiat currency, and this out-of-control inflation that has happened primarily as a result of these changes that were made during this time. And so, you know, the first to leave the gold standard, I'm not sure who exactly the first was. So I think it was Great Britain, Japan, some of the Scandinavian countries left around 1931. So right after the stock market crashed, very quickly, they changed their structure, their system in terms of the finances. And it was a new innovation in finance, right? It wasn't necessarily that the money was tied to anything other than an agreement that it has some sort of worth. And then, you know, the US left the gold standard at the very last degrees of Uranus and Aries, so in 1933. And then after that, by the time we hit 1936, pretty much all of the countries, even the ones that were resisting this change, moved into this fiat currency system and left the gold standards. That would be France, Poland, Belgium, Switzerland. They stayed until 1935, 1936. So by the time we were fully into Uranus and Taurus, everyone had left the gold standard. And, you know, because of the Great Depression, a lot of major changes happened in terms of, you know, international trade, which sort of suffered. There was a huge issue with unemployment in a lot of different countries, especially here in the United States. I think about a quarter of the population was unemployed. Birth rates fell, and women began growing more food, right? So that way they were growing their own food. And part of the reason for this is because, you know, with Uranus and Taurus, we had some earth changes and some weather changes, and we experienced around the same time the Dust Bowl, which happened right in the middle of Uranus and Taurus. And so in the Great Plains states, there wasn't, you know, food. And even all the way up to Canada, you know, where these big, massive farms were, they weren't using proper agricultural practices for the climates they were in. And so there were food shortages. These farmers, a lot of farms went under, and farmers were not allowed to or able to grow food. And a lot of people weren't having as much access to food, so people were starving. So we had a huge unemployment problem, major changes in the currency system, people starving out on the streets, a huge influx of people from the Great Plains states trying to go to California because there was fertile land there, right? Food was still being grown there. It was working out for them. And so there was this huge rush of people moving into California, and the Californians were trying to keep them out, right? So California was trying to put that on lockdown and turning people away. There would be, all these people trying to come, like in trains and stuff, and they would just, say, no, you can't come here, because it was just overwhelming. And so there was another sort of instance with people rushing to California, right, which is interesting. And a lot of different things happened. The Social Security Act was passed. During Uranus and Taurus, there was another recession that happened in 1937, so things started to pick back up, and then it sort of fell. Social Security was passed in the United States. Pretty much everybody else in the westernized countries had some sort of, insurance or safety net for unemployment and disability and retirement and all of that, but United States didn't have that yet, so that was passed. That was a major change, and a major move away from the way things used to be when it came to the United States and the government and the role the government played in our day-to-day lives. And so essentially what went on during this time was like a lot of financial upheaval, major changes in, the weather, earth changes, the way that we grew food had to change. It was forced. And the other thing that really occurred was there was a rise of sort of extremist political movements as a result of the Great Depression, because people wanted answers, people wanted change. And so this was a time of revolution, for better or for worse, right? Mostly for worse, because this was the rise of communism. This was the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany. And so we came in with the Great Depression in 1934 with this Uranus and Taurus transit, and we came out and left this transit in 1942, and we were already in World War II, right? So Pearl Harbor actually happened, which brought the United States in World War II. During this time where Uranus dipped back into Taurus, right? So Uranus moved into Gemini in August of 1941. It went backwards into Taurus in October of 1941, and then stayed there until May 15th of 1942. In that little window, right in the middle there, at the end degrees of Taurus, we had the bombing of Pearl Harbor, which happened in December of 1941, right? So right in that window. So the beginnings and the ends of these transits are usually the most volatile, and that's where the most action is happening. So taking a very good look at what's going on right now in terms of these themes of, finance, agriculture, weather changes, weather modification, the way that we heal our bodies, healing crises, health crises, things like that as well that are occurring right now. And I am focusing a lot more on the United States than other countries, but I'm talking on a global scale here. The only reason, my language and my focus is more on the United States is because that's where I live and that's what I know the most about in terms of our history. But, these changes were occurring in a lot of different areas, and these changes will continue, especially nowadays, right, where we live in this era of like everything being connected on a global scale, right? So when something affects one country, it's going to affect most of the other countries as well. It's not going to necessarily be like, well, it probably could be like the last time, because the last time this came around, the countries that did the best through the Great Depression that were the least affected were like China, right? Because they were separate from everybody else. They didn't have a lot of trade between them and other countries, and they maintained a silver-backed currency. And then we also had the Soviet Union, which was a communist country, and there were actually people fleeing, like Germany and Finland and other countries, to Russia because of the Great Depression, which backfired on them once the war started. But so there's similar themes going on here this time around, but not necessarily in the exact same way. And so we're going to get into some of the changes that I know we can, probably expect, and then what I think might happen and what the potentials are as well. So there's a lot of potential for disruption, for chaos, for revolution, for discomfort, and for, change to come about in a way that's more shocking and more abrupt, and there's more like upheaval happening where it forces change. But there's also a lot of potential for really beautiful new innovations to be coming through in a lot of different areas, and we're already starting to see that. So I'm going to talk about what disruptions we might see, what awareness and awakening we might see in the minds of the collective, right? Because that's also what Uranus is known for. Uranus is the great liberator and the great awakener. It brings flashes of insight. It shakes you out of complacency on a mental, intellectual level and forces you to look at things from a different perspective, and it forces you to look at things more objectively from like an observer's point of view, so you can really see what's going on outside of your emotional sort of reactions to things, right? And so we're going to be looking at things in different ways that we never have looked at them before. And we're going to be coming up with solutions to a lot of these problems that I'm going to be mentioning that are going to be completely outside of our current like frame of mind and paradigm and awareness, because it's just something that isn't there yet, that we've never even thought about. But we can start seeing some of these innovations and what's happening right now. All right, and so looking at the changes that are coming up this time around, we'll start with finance, right? Because that's an area that a lot of people are concerned with. And there's a lot of disruption going on right now in the markets. And so, people are wondering what's coming up and what's going to be happening here. And so the first and foremost, one of the most probable changes that I think will be occurring and that we can already see coming is going to be a shift, for better or for worse, to more of a digital currency system. And this is the direction that we've been headed into for a number of years now. And this is the direction that I believe the government has wanted us to be headed into for a number of years now. And, so there's a phasing out of tangible sort of physical currency and a phasing in of more innovative ways to sort of trade with other people using just numbers that are in a computer as opposed to like paper money. There's also obviously a rise in cryptocurrency. So is the digital currency going to be something that is just a digital version of the US dollar or whatever, the euro? Or is it going to be something completely different? Is it going to be something that's decentralized? Because that's also something that has an association with Uranus, is this decentralization. And so, Uranus moving into Taurus could be either really great for cryptocurrencies, right? So it could be a really good time to invest in cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrencies could have a major rise during this point, especially if there is instability in the economy, which I believe that there will be, because we've been headed in that direction for some time now. There are many, many different bubbles of debt that are just begging to burst, and it boggles my mind that we've gotten this far without it happening yet. We definitely have, especially in the United States, a student debt bubble, right? Where I think it's like almost half of all student loans are not being paid on right now when it comes to the federal student loans, and private student loans are just a whole nother giant mess. There's also a bubble when it comes to financing cars, so like auto loans. There seems to be another housing bubble that's being created. And so there's a lot of debt and there's not a lot of ways to pay it off, right? And so we could see instability in the markets. We could see some sort of recession. I don't know for sure, but it seems like something is going to be disrupted in this area. It's quite likely to happen. And, Uranus and Taurus would be the time where we would be experiencing financial changes on a global level. And, usually we don't change things, even if they need to be changed, until it's absolutely necessary. And so these Uranus transits force our hand sometimes. They make things so just, you can't deal with it anymore. And it's just, you cannot go along with the status quo anymore because it's just not working. It makes it like almost unbearable. And so there will be changes in the financial system. I do think we'll adopt a digital currency. I don't necessarily agree with that or want that, right? I'm not saying this because I love the idea of digital currency, because I think that there are a lot of strings that are attached to that, especially when we get into some of the other things, that Robert and I talked about in our last video, like microchips, right? And putting implants in people. And, where does that lead? And so there could definitely be fluctuations in the stock market. There could be fluctuations and difficulties in terms of like the global economic sphere. There probably will be a shift into digital currency, and whether or not that will have anything to do with cryptocurrency, that's yet to be seen. There could also be huge fluctuations and difficulties in the cryptocurrency markets as well. So you might see huge wild swings in the markets during this time, because that's what Uranus brings, right? It's like giant, disruption that's sort of unexpected and chaotic, and it's just very abrupt and unusual, and it makes things sort of difficult. So it's difficult to keep your feet on solid ground in these areas sometimes. But again, for better or for worse, you might see fluctuations in one way and fluctuations in another way, and these markets are already quite volatile. You could also see huge fluctuations in gold and silver prices that are coming up, and I think that will probably happen. I think currency as we know it, in the monetary system as we know it, will not exist on the other end of this 8-year transit. So 8 years from now, we will be using a completely different form of currency, one that has nothing to do with whatever it is that we're doing right now, or at least it's not going to be the same, or it's not going to really be recognizable as it stands right now. So it's not going to be like a paper dollar or anything like that. But whatever it's replaced with, right, that has yet to be seen. And so I have my sort of ideas about what will come from that. And I don't believe it's going to be what we want, right? Because even if we do have a decentralized cryptocurrency and everybody's using that, the government is going to find a way to take control of that, because that's just what they do, right? And so that'll be a big change. I also feel like, when we're talking about Taurus, we're talking about the opposition to Taurus as well. Anytime you're talking about one sign, you're talking about the opposite sign as well. And so integrating those two energies. And the opposite sign of Taurus is Scorpio. What does Scorpio rule? Debt, right? But it also rules taxes. And so I kind of have a feeling that there's going to be a disruption in terms of income taxes, where things are going to change quite drastically. I get the sense that people might stop paying their taxes, or something sort of interesting like that might come along, like out of protest, right? That would be an interesting form of protest here in the United States, especially if we just decided to stop paying income tax, right? Or stop paying property tax. If everybody just did that in protest of the way that they're using our money, think about how things would change there, right? So I think a change to the tax system could come about. The way I would like to see the change in the tax system to come about is very different than what I think will happen. But yeah. I think that there will be changes in that area as well. When I spoke with Robert Phoenix, we talked about the idea of automation and robotics replacing jobs. So the way that we do our jobs in a very physical, tangible way is going to change over these next few years. And so some jobs might be lost because of this automation. So a lot of the more basic, I don't want to say basic, but the less skilled labor, and also some of the more manual labor jobs are going to probably be replaced by robotics. They're already working on that. They're even having like driverless cars and drones delivering packages, and God knows what else. And so it's on its way, right? That's something that's going to be happening, again, for better or for worse. Not necessarily a fan of these things, but it seems like it's going that way. And so a lot of this person-to-person interaction that we have in our day-to-day experience, going to the grocery store, having the mailman come to our door or something like that to deliver a package, that's going to be phased out. It's going to be a lot more automation. And so people are going to have to figure out what to do in terms of their jobs. And so one of the things that is very positive with Uranus and Taurus is that it compels people to create resources for themselves in a way that's much more sovereign and free. So creating your own resources through your own independent hard work, right? Liberating yourself in the way that you create resources, and liberating yourself from depending on others as a source of income. Because by and large, most people are very dependent on corporations or on outside entities to feed and clothe and do everything for them, right? Because if you don't have that paycheck, you can't pay your rent, so you don't have a house. You can't, buy your food, so you can't eat. And so people are going to become much more resourceful, I think, with their finances and with the way that they create their finances. We're going to see, which we already saw, with Uranus and Aries, a bigger drive towards self-employment. I think that's only going to increase throughout this time. I also think that, a lot of the jobs in automation will be replaced, hopefully will be replaced by jobs that are more in line with like a restorative agriculture sort of economy, or restorative economy, where we're sort of fixing the damage that we've done to Mother Earth, right? And we're fixing that through the way that we grow our food in ways that are actually beneficial to the soil and that are repairing and replenishing the earth. And through coming up, a lot of new innovations are going to come up involving, ways to clean up the oceans and clean up the earth, and to, extract resources if we need to, in a way that's much cleaner and much more safe. In terms of the way that we interact with the environment, there's going to have to be changes in this area, because it's gonna be forced, right? There's going to be weather changes, there's going to be earth changes, and that's something that's already coming up right now as we shift from Aries into Taurus. This past year, we've had the craziest weather, like globally, that has happened, at least since I've been alive, right? On record, it's probably like some of the craziest weather that we've ever experienced in our recorded history. And so it's getting a little dicey out there, right? So there's going to have to be changes in the way that we sort of go about utilizing the land, growing our food, that type of thing. And so I think that there will be actually a shift um, to more restorative agriculture, which is already a thing that's starting to become more prevalent, where we're repairing the soil. There's going to be soil remediation efforts, things like permaculture and biodynamic farming, which are already starting to gain popularity over the past few years, especially, will become much more prevalent, much more mainstream. A lot more people are going to be getting into that. I do think independence in terms of creating and growing your own food will be important over these next 8 years. There's already, again, started to be a shift toward people wanting to do that, to get back on the land, to have like a small scale farm or a homestead, or at least a garden where you're growing your food and you're eating the food that you take from your own land. And I think that that's going to become more and more prevalent out of people being interested in it, because they see what monocropping and industrialized agriculture, pesticides, herbicides, GMOs, they see what this is doing to the earth, and they see what this is doing to their bodies, right? So that's going to be part of the shift toward more people growing their own food, more community gardens, more small scale organic, biodynamic farms and things like that. But I think also it will happen out of necessity, because the way that the crops are being grown right now, it's not necessarily sustainable. They can come up with new technology and new chemicals to spray on things to keep things growing, but these things that they're growing are completely nutrient deficient. And so people are eating food that is devoid of nutrients. They're just eating empty food. And that's why people are so sick. And even if you eat all the right things, and even if it is organic, it's usually deficient in the nutrients that you think that you're getting. And so people have nutritional deficiencies who are otherwise very healthy. And so there's going to be a change in the way that we farm our food, the way we grow our food. I do think independence and sovereignty in terms of our food and the way that we create whatever we put into our bodies is going to be a big thing as well. And that sort of leads me to health, right? So, well, actually, let's go to weather modification too. So there's going to be more technological innovations for farming that I think will come up, for better or for worse, right? So I think that there's going to be one side of the spectrum where they're going to be creating new technologies that are going to help to improve the earth, remediate the soil, and grow things like in smaller spaces, growing food all over the place, right? Greening of the cities, like Agenda 21 kind of stuff, I think will be more prevalent during this time, especially because the agenda is for 2021, right? But I do think like vertical gardening, different technologies for gardening and growing food that are positive and beneficial, and where you can grow, even when the earth is changing and the weather is kind of chaotic. I think that's going to be an innovation that comes about. But on the other side, you're going to have the big corporations that don't want to let go of their old practices, because it's going to be, for them, more profitable and easier to just create more chemicals, to create more technology that damages the soil and creates, nutritionless food, and just pump that out there. So that'll be happening on the other side. There's going to be, there's always two sides to every transit, right? There's the positive sort of light side, and there's the shadow side, or like the sort of negative, difficult side of the transit. And so you're going to see a combination of both things going on both sides of the spectrum, just like how we have a shift toward digital currency and microchipping, but we also have people who are into cryptocurrencies and creating these decentralized forms of currency where people can become more sovereign in the way that they utilize their resources and trade with one another. So we have both ends of the spectrum going on there, right? We have this very controlled corporate side, and then we have the more Uranian side, right? The innovations that are happening on a more individualistic level. So yeah, so those are the things that are going on there. And then, you know, um, there will be probably new innovations healing what's the damage that's done to the planet. I do think the earth changes. I think the weather is going to become much more unpredictable over these next 8 years, which we can already see coming. I don't need to be an astrologer looking at Uranus and Taurus to, you know, to predict that, right? The earth changes are going to get a little bit more dramatic. A lot more dramatic over these next few years. And I think that weather modification, which is already occurring right now on a global scale, is going to be occurring much more openly. And that we're already starting to see that as we come into the shift. We see articles from like Harvard and different, you know, research institutes about weather modification and cloud seeding and things like that, where they're starting to admit openly that these technologies are not only possible, but they've been playing around with them already. And so we've known for a very long time that they've been doing these types of things, or at least, you know, sort of people who think more unconventionally, who are outside of the mainstream, more on the fringe, know that these things have been happening. But this is going to become much more mainstream. It's going to be happening much more in plain sight, out in the open, more so than it already is, because if you can see with your eyes, you can see what's going on out there. But they're going to be admitting it, and they're going to be telling us that this is to sort of counteract or negate or protect us from these earth changes, right? And so, you know, however you feel about that, for better or for worse, I do think that's something that's going to be more prominent, more prevalent, and more mainstream. One of the things that we see when Uranus moves into a sign is the mainstreaming of innovations that have been happening sort of on the fringe when Uranus was in the previous sign, and also sort of an exponential increase in awareness of the problems that have been going on all along as well, the ones that are associated with that sign, like we mentioned before. And so these things will all come about. In the areas of health, I think that there's going to be a lot of interesting changes in that area. I think there's going to be a lot of alternative, innovative methods for healing that are going to be coming about, you know, merging old wisdom with new technology. So like, you know, new techniques involving herbs and herbalism, or, you know, homeopathy, or healing the body with frequency, which is something that actually started to come about pretty predominantly in the 1920s. And then we had the stock market crash in the Great Depression, and a lot of that technology, like Rife technology, was suppressed, squashed, you know, taken apart, destroyed, or people just lost interest too. There are some instances of that, because, you know, we had a quarter of the population starving out on the streets, right? So, you know, in that case, people are not necessarily so concerned with funding really expensive and elaborate frequency devices that are experimental, right? They're focusing more on how are we going to create jobs and how are we going to feed ourselves. And so a lot of that fell by the wayside in the 1930s. The 1920s, we saw this huge emergence of these like different medical devices and technologies for healing, and then they just all disappeared, you know, when Uranus moved into Taurus. And even a little bit before that, they started to disappear. So I do think that these technologies are making a comeback, and I've seen that in my own life. I mentioned in my video that I did with Lada back in October that I myself have a Rife machine, right, a frequency generator. I had a lot of people messaging me, asking me about that, wanting to know which one that I use. And so if you want that information, you can send me an email. My email address is in the description of this video below. I'm not going to just, you know, divulge everything on here, but I will say that I have one that's it's very like inexpensive, user-friendly, and I've seen for myself that it definitely works. But again, it is experimental, right? You're kind of experimenting on your body when you use these technologies, because they're not heavily researched in the mainstream, but there is a lot of anecdotal evidence, and I've experienced myself, you know, how these devices work, and that they can truly bring healing on a lot of different levels, especially when it comes to killing off certain pathogens. On the other side of the spectrum, though, these devices can be used for things that are terrible, right? So if you can heal somebody with frequency, you can, you know, kill them with frequency as well. And so I think that that's going to be something that we're going to be seeing on the other side of the spectrum, is how these frequency devices can be used for evil. Maybe even in like weapons and things like that. And also frequency, you know, for weather modification and different things like that happening as well. So that's going to be, I think, more of a fringe topic that people are going to start to sort of cultivate an awareness of as well. But the other thing too, I think, is on the same spectrum, like along the same line, is that people are going to become much more aware of the way that frequency in general and that energy affects the body, right? Because we're talking about Uranus. Uranus is energy, it's electricity, it's like electric shock. And Taurus is the body, right? It's physicality. And so there's already an awareness, again, on the outskirts and in the alternative sort of communities of the way that EMFs and different frequencies, like the Wi-Fi connections that we're, just bathing in the cell phone towers and, the smart meters and even our electrical system in our home and the dirty energy that can sort of be emitted when things are not wired properly or when they're set up in a certain way. And so there's going to be a greater awareness of how frequency affects the body and how EMFs in particular are affecting the body, right? And this is something that people have been really diving into and researching over these past few years. And I think it is going to become more mainstream. And somebody in our last video with Robert Phoenix commented about this in the comment section, and I'm glad that this person did, because it just reminded me of the fact that 5G is going to be rolling out during Uranus and Taurus. And so this is a huge increase in the strength of the signal of this like global, not almost global, like 4G network, right, that we already have, where we're always connected to phones and to Wi-Fi. Wherever it is that we go, we have like some sort of connection where we can connect to other people. Even where I'm at, like, out in a rural area, sort of in the middle of the desert, pretty much everywhere there's still a cell phone connection and there's still some, 3G, 4G, whatever going on. This is going to be much more, much stronger, much more intense, and they haven't tested the effects of this on a global scale in a long-term or on a long-term basis, how this affects your health. And so we're going to be a part of an ever continuing and evolving global experiment when it comes with frequency. And so there will be a greater awareness of EMFs, and I think 5G might have something to do with that. Because I think people who are already reactive to frequencies might become even more, and even people who are not that sensitive are going to start feeling it more, because we just have more and more pouring in all the time. So that's some of the things that I think are happening. Whether you agree with me or not, that's my take on it. And so we'll see over the next few years what occurs in that area. So that's a lot of what I have been thinking about and sort of, ruminating on when it comes to the big changes that are coming with Uranus and Taurus. Some of the other changes that I think are going to be occurring have to do with boundaries. I think that, boundaries when it comes to like borders and things like that might change, because it is very much dividing up the earth in different ways. And again, me and Robert Phoenix talked about this in that last video. So if you want to go more into that, you can jump back and rewatch that video or watch it for the first time and get some more information about some of the other changes that might be coming up, because I'm not going to be redundant and just repeat what what he was saying or what we were both saying in the last video. But so it's going to be kind of an interesting time. I think that and again, this isn't going to happen all at once. This is an 8-year transit. So over the course of the next 8 years, we're going to very gradually and sometimes very drastically and quickly see a lot of major changes in these areas. And so this is why I'm going to be doing a series, and this is my first Uranus and Taurus talk in this video, but I'm going to be doing a series of interviews with people who are on the cutting edge of the innovation side of the Uranus and Taurus energy, right? So people who are on the cutting edge of innovations when it comes to health and new technologies in health, and merging old wisdom with new techniques and new technologies when it comes to health and healing. I'm going to be talking to a lot of people who are into digital currency, cryptocurrency, astrologers who are into financial astrology, predicting the markets and things like that. I'm going to be talking to people who, do restorative agriculture, permaculture, biodynamics, talk about growing food by like the cycles of like the planetary cycles, right? Using astrology to help you to plan when to plant things and how to grow things better and when to harvest stuff. And people who are experts in weather modification and these types of things. We'll see if we can get some of those. But I have a whole bunch of interviews lined up, so stay tuned for that if you're interested, because I'm really excited for that. And I'm also going to be posting, if it's not on here yet, because it's not going to be up today, but I will be posting in the comments below or in the description below within a couple of days. I did do a written forecast for all 12 signs, or I'm still working on the written forecast for all 12 signs. I made a complete guide to Uranus and Taurus, so it's beyond just that. But I'm going to be posting that before Uranus moves into Taurus next week. So you can just hop onto my website, PersephoneReturns.com. The link is in the description below, and you will find that article, and it'll be connected with links to every single video that I've done so far on Uranus and Taurus, including my interview with Astrolata, my interview with Robert Phoenix, and all of my Uranus and Taurus and the elements videos where I broke down for each sign in the video what you can expect with Uranus moving into Taurus. So I got you covered for Uranus and Taurus. If you think of anything else that you think might be changing, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. This is not an all-encompassing list, and this does not mean that everything that I said is going to happen. This is just what I see and what I feel is most probable in terms of the coming changes and innovations that'll be occurring in this area. So I'd love to hear from you guys. So if you think that there's other things that might be happening, feel free to comment below. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. And I'm really excited for all of the innovations that are coming and everything that we're about to move into. So I hope that Uranus and Taurus treats you well. All right, bye.